062-291, number 2, take
Wait
one.
1 minute.
I was probably the first one there because I had to set up the drums. So I had my drums, set them up, and waited till everybody else filed in. He just came in with little notes that he had. He didn't even have sheet music for that. And the only thing he'd tell me was like, just swing, you know? It was just swing.
I didn't write out the music for Kind of Blue, but brought in sketches because I wanted a lot of spontaneity in the playing. I knew that if you've got some great musicians, they will deal with the situation and play beyond what is there and above where they think they can.
The first part of So What? Do boom bang, dum boom boom, do do dee do do da da da, do dee do 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 do. Then Paul go into the bass thing, boo doo ba doo ba dee ba do.
Dee doo, boom 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 boom. Man, that was the first thing I ever heard from Miles. Grabbed the record out of my father's record collection, put it on. First thing that catches your ear is Paul Chambers playing that bass line.
We can't even question the sacred texts that we have, right? Like, you know, I mean, why is the Bible the Bible? It's the Bible, you know? I mean, why is Kind of Blue kind of blue? It's kind of blue. Like, it just is, and it changed the sound of jazz.
The cymbal crash at the start of So What, I thought I had overdone it. It sounded louder than it should have been to me.
And it seems to ring forever, but it brings you right into the tune. It's like you've hit the highway, and the rest of the tune just takes off.
Welcome, once again, to the Radical Imagination. I'm your host, Jim Vrettos. I'm a sociologist who's taught at John Jay College of Criminal Justice and Yeshiva University here in New York. Jazz has been called America's classical music, America's original art form, a major musical genre and expression that spread around the world from its roots in the African American communities of New Orleans in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. As it spread, it drew on national, regional, and local musical culture, which gave rise to different styles. New Orleans jazz from the early 1900s on combined brass band marches, French square dances, Caribbean ballroom dances originating in Guadeloupe and Martinique with African rhythms, and ragtime and blues with collective multi-voice and sound improvisation. The 1930s saw heavily arranged, dance-oriented swing big bands, Kansas City hard-swinging, bluesy jazz improvisational style, and gypsy jazz rooted in sensual Parisian cafe music. Bebop and its faster tempo emerged in the 1940s. The end of that decade saw the development of cool jazz, introducing calmer, smoother sound and long, linear melodic lines. The late 1950s saw a movement toward free jazz, which explored playing without regular meter, beat, or formal structures. Modal jazz, jazz rock fusion, acid jazz, smooth jazz, progressive jazz, jazz funk, and Latin and Afro-Cuban jazz are just some of the many subgenres that developed in the last several decades. The list goes on and on. Now, jazz throughout its evolving path has also profoundly influenced every American musical and artistic expression, including classic. Listen to the music of Bernstein, Gershwin, Copland, Ferdy Groffet, Scott Joplin, Kurt Weill, and European greats such as Shostakovich, Stravinsky, Ravel, and Prokofiev, and you'll hear the influence. It's deeply moved, challenged, and stimulated thought and action in our political, intellectual, and moral life and culture as well. And through the tumultuous history of it all, for over 5 decades, jazz trumpeter, band leader, and composer Miles Davis was at the forefront of many of the major stylistic developments in jazz. We are thrilled and blessed to have on the Radical Imagination today the director, writer, and producer of a major new documentary film on his life, Miles Davis, Birth of the Cool. I can't introduce the film any better than our guest's own words and statement on it. So let me paraphrase those words and use them to explain. The story of Miles Davis has often been told as the story of a drug addict genius. You rarely see a portrait of a man that worked hard at honing his craft, a man who deeply studied and understood classical music, an elegant man who could render ballads with such tenderness, yet hold rage in his heart from the racism he faced throughout his life. He could be extremely generous, yet rescind that generosity on a whim. He could be shamelessly romantic with the women in his life, then unspeakably cruel. Mills was a man apart in life, in love, in music. And there's never been a major documentary about this man who never looked back, rarely apologized, and changed everything we thought we knew about jazz and about music several times in his career. He was ever evolving and was up to the rest of the world to catch up. At times, his persona eclipsed his music. He was known as a ladies' man, an abusive womanizer, an intellectual and a junkie, a good friend and a bad father, glamorous, reclusive, and vain, larger than life, a legend, but not altogether real. We're fascinated with him. He was a singular voice and force of nature, the very embodiment of cool. My co-host for this show is Felipe Luciano. Felipe is a gifted poet, political activist, one of the founding members of the Young Lords, media personality, and artistic life force in his own right. He's a superb chronicler and commentator on all kinds of music and genres, but especially in the Latin and Afro-Cuban tradition. As I've said, our guest today is an American documentary filmmaker, a MacArthur Genius winner, best known as a director, writer, and producer of documentaries examining African American history and experiences. He's a recipient of the 2013 National Humanities Medal from President Obama and has won 3 Primetime Emmy Awards. Among his notable films are Freedom Riders, Wounded Knee, Jonestown, The Life and Death of People's Temple, Sweet Honey in the Rock, Raise Your Voice, A Place of Our Own, The Murder of Emmett Till, The Black Press, Soldiers Without Swords, and America Revisited. He was a guest of ours a few years ago on the show to discuss his award-winning documentary, The Black Panthers, Vanguard of the Revolution. And we're thrilled he's here again to discuss what I'm sure will be another award-winning new movie, Miles Davis, Birth of the Cool. Welcome, Stanley and Felipe.
Thank you.
To the Radical Imagination.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Great
you.
to be here.
Thank you for being here. Wow, this is a unbelievable movie that people have to go see. It's playing at the Film Forum in New York City until September 19th.
Right.
At least plans to bring it to other theaters and so on.
Mm-hmm.
You're working on that. Start off with, why Miles Davis at this point of your career? How does it fit in, if it does,
Right.
I'm sure it does, in some way to the body of your work?
Well,
What's the connection?
it's interesting because I never think about it as a body of work. It's kind
You
of
don't?
No, I
Well,
think each film is individual. I'm a real jazz fan, a real music fan. I've tended to use a lot of music in my films and wanted to have the chance to do just a real music film. And you know, what's a better character than Miles Davis? You know, I mean, I think you described him so well in the opening. Besides the incredible, beautiful music in all these different genres over 5 decades, there's the very complicated personality that Miles has, which, you know, is one thing that you want in a character. You know, you don't want a simple character, you want a complicated character, and Miles was that and more.
And part of the various political struggles in American culture over those 5 decades.
Yeah, I mean, I think
the
that's
civil rights movements and so on in various forms.
Yeah, I think that's one of the
that's
one of the subtexts of the film, is that, you know, is Miles was, you know, a black man living in America in the 20th century, and you know what he had to go through. As a lot of people don't know, you know, Miles grew up very, very wealthy, especially for the African American community.
His father was a dentist?
In East St. Louis. His father was a dentist, and you know, Miles, they had a house in East St. Louis, and they had a farm outside of East St. Louis with the horses. Miles had horses and all of those kind of things, but yet he was still subjected to the racism that any black man, any black person would be subjected to. He was born in 1926, in 1926 East St. Louis, or in 1926 America. So, you know, that's the constant theme that's there throughout the film, is Miles kind of fighting through racism to try to create art, and in some ways, you know, the struggle that we're still having to kind of, you know, be free.
Yes. Yeah, and the impact on his personality as well. That struggle. What we need to do is just play a couple minutes of the trailer, and then we'll get into more of the substance of the movie, the documentary. Here's the trailer for Miles Davis.
Music has always been like a curse with me. It's the first thing in my life. Go to bed thinking about it and wake up thinking about it. That's all I live for.
Miles started very early.
He looked at things differently. He saw things differently. Without a doubt, the most unique person I've ever known.
They wanted to be an artist just like Stravinsky.
A lot of the old guys thought that if you went to school, it would make you play like you were white. If you learned something from theory, you would lose the feeling in your playing. I wanted to see what was going on in all of music.
Julia, in the daytime, and at night, he'd be on 52nd Street.
He put the bell of his horn right into the microphone and changed the whole world of jazz right there.
He comes up with a style that is truly reflective of who he is. He was angry, antisocial.
But then he starts playing, and people are like, oh, he just disarms you.
He surrounded himself with young, emerging, unknown voices.
We were kids.
We were looking at every night going to a laboratory. Miles was a head chemist.
He wanted us to live on the stage, creating in front of the people. Don't lean on what you know. What he was looking for is the stuff that you don't know.
We didn't just want to play with Miles Davis. We wanted to be Miles Davis.
Miles's audience was changing, absorbing what was happening now.
If anybody wants to keep creating, they have to be about change. I lost my sense of discipline and started to drift. Before I knew it, I had a heroin habit.
Miles becomes representative of a kind of cool, kind of sophistication, a kind of masculinity.
Miles and Francis. I mean, we were a hot couple.
The elevator opened, and there he was. It was like in a movie when you meet the vampire and you know you're gonna die and you don't care.
He becomes our black Superman.
All I ever wanted to do was communicate what I felt through music.
Wow. Don't lean on what you know.
All right.
Well, hop in anytime, Felipe, but 52nd Street. So when does he come to New York? Take us.
So Miles
his
was
early
raised.
youth and
Miles was raised in East St. Louis.
East St. Louis, okay.
His parents had a very abusive relationship, and this is what Miles sees growing up.
Right.
And Miles is kind of a boy genius. He's playing with a big band in the trumpet section at 14. And there's a great picture in the film of Miles. He's this little tiny kid with men playing the trumpet, and he has this thing that happens to him when he's 18 is he gets a chance to sit in a band that includes Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie. And at that
and his
point,
parents do support that early.
Yeah, well, his mother wanted him to play the violin.
The violin.
Always gets a laugh in the film.
Right,
But his father said, no, he's going to play the trumpet.
Okay.
And he gets a chance to sit in this band and realizes right away that he's got to get to New York. So he leaves East St. Louis and comes to New York, and he comes ostensibly,
18
he's 18, he comes ostensibly to go to Juilliard, because his mother would agree that he could come to New York as long as, if he went to Juilliard and was trained as a classical musician. So he comes to New York, he's going to Juilliard at night, but during the day, he's going to Juilliard during the day, but at night, he's on 52nd Street, looking looking for Charlie Parker.
And found him on the streets.
Yeah, and finally finds Charlie Parker, and he happens to find Charlie Parker at the time when
Charlie Parker comes up to him and says, "I hear you're looking for me."
Yeah, I hear you're looking for me. And he finds Charlie Parker at the same point. Dizzy Gillespie leaves Charlie Parker's group, and Charlie Parker says, "Okay, Miles, you're my trumpeter," and
Wow.
his career takes off from there.
Yeah. As a culture, African American culture has never quite had a noble. We've had political nobles. We've had Du Bois, we've had King, but we've never had a cultural noble. If Miles is anything, he's a cultural aristocrat who never lost his sense of the earth and always kept it black. Now, what's amazing about Miles is that heretofore we had dealt with musicians who were fair-skinned, Lester, Sidney
Young,
Fletcher, Lester Young, and Dizzy. Miles was definitively black. Definitively black. Right. Fine-skinned, Arab-looking.
Stanley wants to get in here.
I was going to say he's definitively black, but definitively beautiful.
And beautiful.
And that was the thing about Miles.
That's what I wanted to say. That he was a beautiful, beautiful man. And
he was handsome,
but not only
gorgeous
that,
looking guy.
But he internalized it.
Yeah.
When you're raised in a family that's wealthy, you don't have to validate yourself to anybody. You see what I'm saying? You don't have to do that. So I loved the fact that when people say, well, he was isolationist or he was a drug addict, they never say that about Leonard Bernstein. Leonard Bernstein was a dope fiend. No one wants, yes, he was. He was a heroin addict. He was also bisexual. No one brings that up. No one brings up the fact that
not throughout his career, but
Leonard Bernstein was gone here in New York. I mean, he was into it. No one talks about Pablo Picasso and his horrible fathering. No one talks about that. No one talks about Charlie Chaplin and his womanizing.
Well, by the way, we did.
But wait a minute, let me finish this thought.
We did have Jamie Bernstein, so we did talk about Leonard and his relationship with his daughter.
But we seem to focus on the fact that Miles Davis was all of these things, and no one talks about these other guys. It's the racism of our critique. It's the racism of the way we look at aesthetics, and it really pisses me off because you see this guy. Rousseau, one of the great philosophers, used to pee on his pants. Who cares? Yeah. He had the finest. He has one of the finest minds in philosophy. I think this film puts him in the perspective of an icon, of a genius, which he was. What is it about us that we don't want to see and give him the credit that he deserves? The man is remarkable. There are some people who got mad at his evolution into what we call modal jazz, into jazz, the rock jazz.
Fusion.
When he came out with Bitches Brew, I went crazy. I loved it. When he came out with Jack Johnson, I loved it. I mean, he was going, he tells you, he told me what, he said, I went to see him in the hospital. He said, man, I don't want to, don't even talk to me about the past. I don't want to hear about the past. He hated anything that was old. Let me move into today and the future. That was Miles Davis. If we as a people thought like that, we'd control America.
You want to comment on what he?
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that we wanted to do in the film that was really important to us is that we talk about that later period, that we talk about Bitches Brew and the music that came after it, because so many times that's kind of given the short end of the stick and people want to say, oh no. But that music is really important. It's really important music. It's really music that people loved. It laid the foundation, as Greg Tate, I think, says in the film, for drum and bass, hip hop, ambient music, all these things that came after it. This is in the early 70s, right after Bitches Brew comes out. That's some of that music that he laid down then is just incredible, and the stuff in the 80s. You know, there's some great stuff there too. So I thought it was really important that we do talk about that and not just say, oh, it all ended with Kind of Blue, because it didn't. No, I mean, and also the musicians that came out of those bands. You know, incredible. Jack DeJohnette, you know, Keith Jarrett, Chick Corea, all those guys, Lenny White, who we saw in the film.
Jaco Pastorius.
All those people came out of those bands with Miles, and then have laid the groundwork you know, for music ever since.
But he did go enough to classes at Juilliard to appreciate the social theory and a certain amount of the classical tradition. He did say, you know, too much of it maybe, and that's why he had to leave that too. But so he was well versed in that tradition. I think he had white musicians in his band. He wasn't afraid of that and stuff and so on. If you could play, whoever it was in there. You want to?
I just think his mind was both lyrical and rhythmic. You have to have that kind of a mind to play something like Around Midnight, the Thelonious Monk tune, which for me was the beginning of my immersion, deep spiritual conversion and immersion into what I call bop. What he did is transform the entire. Listen to what he did. 1945, he forms this association with Max Roach, with Dizzy Gillespie, and with Thelonious Monk, and it's called bop. He takes the notes that we normally associate with walking, doom, 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 go doom, and he triple speeds it. Then he moves from there to what we call cool jazz. He got tired of that. He did that, and he moved. If you hear about
where did hard bop?
Hard bop comes out of Harlem, actually. And it really it wasn't funk. It was just taking the music, normal music, and normal jazz music, and giving it a very, very fast tempo, and improvising on the spot. You never heard the same song twice.
This is a precursor of hip hop. I mean,
well, I almost don't like to. I understand what you're saying. I never like to associate hip hop with jazz. I don't know why. Maybe me, but I don't like to do that. So now you have. Then he moves into cool. He moves into cool. Some people blame him for destroying the dancer bass and you know, destroying it because we lost the funk. Sonny Rollins says when Miles went into cool, we lost the hard bop that Jackie McLean and Sonny Rollins are known for. All of these cats come from, you know, Sugar Hill. But Miles wanted to move on. Then he moves into electronic music. There are some people, I just finished talking to Amina Baraka, and she said, I couldn't take him when he did that.
No, some people don't like it.
Yeah, she said, I couldn't take him. And the way he dressed, I loved it. He wanted to move to the next step.
I mean, look, Miles could have, you know, people say Miles sold out when he did Bitches Brew and that music. Look, Miles could have made a living for the rest of his life, a fortune, just going around playing Kind of Blue.
That's right.
You know, I'm gonna go and tonight Miles Davis plays Kind of Blue. You know, play track 1, track 2, track 3, track just and just do that. That's all he had to do. But you know, if you're gonna sell out, I mean, if you're gonna sell out, what's even more fascinating to me is what kind of mind sells out by making Bitches Brew. Like, go listen to Bitches Brew.
Great point.
Go listen to Bitches.
So it's not, obviously it's not, he never sold out.
But what people don't know, and Miles says it in the film, is Bitches Brew became the fastest jazz selling album ever. It was. So 400,000 copies, you know, in like the first month or something, which is like, you know, if you look now, an album might be at the top of the charts with you know, 90,000
100,000, 200.
Yeah.
But he did have financial worries, right? On and off. Or did he not?
He wasn't the most frugal person in the world.
No.
But neither was Art Blakey. Neither were any of them. None of them ended up.
Miles spent money.
Yeah, none of them, Dizzy, none of them ended up with mansions in Nantucket. They didn't.
Miles kind of did. Miles kind of did.
Yeah.
Miles was good at business. So
okay.
what happens for Miles, and one of the things that we
allude
to.
He had his own house, right?
Well, yeah, he had a brownstone on 77th Street. He ended up with a beautiful house in Malibu.
Upper
But one
West
of the
Side.
things, one of the things that happened for Miles was he signs with Columbia.
Yes.
And Columbia is like is the biggest record company in the world.
Exactly.
And Columbia guarantees him a certain amount of money per year.
And the
So
only
they put
other
him on a
musician
salary.
that they guaranteed was who? Horowitz.
Really? Yeah.
Vladimir Horowitz?
Vladimir Horowitz. That's it. Miles Davis, Vladimir Horowitz. That was okay.
they look at
He was at
Miles
that
as a
level.
real star, and they sign him. And so because he's on this contract, Miles can then back up and say, okay, what do I want to do next?
Reflection.
You know, maybe I'll do sketches of Spain. I'll do a Spanish album with 19 pieces with Gil Evans. You know, where we actually worked in a building in the Bay Area where they distributed albums and CDs, and you'd be amazed at how many albums like somebody like John Coltrane put out as a sideman in like 1956, 57, 58, because he had to keep playing. You know, and they would just go in and just play. 6 show tunes, you know, but Miles didn't have to do that. He didn't have to do that. And Miles, just one more thing. One thing that somebody told me that I thought was fascinating. This is not in the film, unfortunately, but I thought was really fascinating. Is Miles Davis had 2 jobs in his whole life. He had a newspaper route for a month when he was a kid, and he was a musician.
Great.
He didn't do anything else.
Great if you can do that.
He didn't do anything else.
Absolutely.
And so you're talking about that. A lot of these jazz players at this time who had day jobs, or they would have to do something else, or they would, you know, Miles didn't, and so Miles had time to think. And I don't want to belittle, you know, Miles in any way, because it allowed him to create some great music.
Why not? Right.
But he did have that time that other jazz musicians kind of didn't have.
As you put it, as an intellectual, he had certain luxury.
One of the wonderful things about Stanley's work is that Stanley is able to get beyond the viscera. He's able to get beyond the epidermal stuff and get into the sinews, you know, get into subdermis. And in this film, he gets into it. His leitmotif, if you will, he's using pieces of music that filter, that weave themselves into the film. Paraphernalia, for example, I was talking to him before we got on the air with Miles, who's one of my favorite pieces. It has George Benson on it. People think George Benson is a popular artist on Broadway. He is a phenomenal jazz artist. You hear him do, you hear the way he speaks to the viscera of Miles. Stanley mentioned just a few moments ago how beautiful he was as a person. You can think of him as an Ashanti king, as a Nigerian king. He had an elegance and an aristocracy that used to knock people out. What they wanted him to do is validate and legitimize himself to them. He never did. He was who he was.
Take him or leave him.
Take him or leave him, and he was pretty. And it's not that he didn't know it. He didn't pay attention to that. In fact, he was so shocked when they arrested him in front, was it the Village Gate?
Tell us about that.
It was the Village Vanguard.
Birdland.
It was
Birdland.
1959.
But when he is so shocked by that, you could see it in the film. He's looking at the camera. It's like, how could? Wait a minute.
Tell us what happened there.
So,
59 in Birdland.
So Miles is at the top of his game. Kind of Blue has just come out. It goes on to become the biggest selling jazz album ever in the world. Right. He's in a club playing. They're on a break. He goes out to walk this white woman to get a cab, as he says, a pretty white girl to get a cab. Right. He gets her a cab. He's standing outside smoking a cigarette, and this cop comes along and says, "Move on." And Miles says, "No, I'm not. Why should I move on? There's my name. His name is up in lights. That's who I am. I'm Miles Davis. Who are you? I'm Miles Davis. I'm not moving." And he takes a beat down from the cops. You know, gets totally bloodied because he's there as a star. You know, there are a bunch of photographers like downstairs. They all come running up and start taking pictures. Jimmy Cobb, who's in the film, was there and saw the whole thing happen. Miles calls his wife Frances, who's there, and she comes in, and she's in the film. And they all talk about this incident that Miles affected Miles greatly. As Miles says, you know, I thought New York was the hippest place on earth, you know, and here I am taking this beat up from a cop. And this affects Miles for the rest of his life. You know, Marcus Miller, the great bass player, says, you know, Miles will be talking about this in the 80s. And we'd just be talking, Miles would say, "Oh, God, man, cops." You know, you know, and because how does that affect you? And somebody else in the film says, you know, this says, you know, it doesn't matter who you are in the United States as a black man, as a black person. You know, it doesn't matter that your name is on the marquee, that you're the best-selling jazz, you know, performer in the world. You know, you still can't escape from this.
Be a target.
You can't escape from this. You can't escape from this thing, and that affected Miles the rest of his life.
How about in his music, do you think? After that,
well, I think one of the things that was our kind of driving force in the film, and you know, I'll tell you this, it's kind of one of those themes that's not like right out there in the film, is okay, so how does this guy who's so argumentative with people, who's so hard, you know, who has such an abusive relationship with women oftentimes, make some of the most beautiful music that's ever been made? Without a doubt. You know, Miles is pouring his heart out through the trumpet, and one of the things that somebody says right before the incident, you know, where he takes the beat down, is that Miles, through his music, was able to show another side of himself that he couldn't show out there in the world. And the whole, what I love about that is it's not only Miles, you know, it's a comment on what we have to do sometimes as black men. You know, we can't be soft. We're doing another film right now about crack, about the crack epidemic, which I should talk to you about. And one guy,
are you going to get in contact with Jamel Shabazz?
I'll talk about it after.
Okay.
And one guy says in one of the crack dealers, you know, he says, you know, it started out, you know, just fun and games, but then at the end he said you couldn't even laugh.
No, you couldn't.
You couldn't laugh. Somebody made a joke, you could go heh heh, but you can't. You better not laugh.
It was the beginning of the soft. It was the beginning. You still see that on the streets. It was the beginning of the loss of humor.
Yeah. You can't. Yeah. So, you know, I mean, but so that
and vulnerability.
So that's the you know, that's taken to the nth degree. But you know, even in 1956, 59, you know, 61 for Miles and for so many other black men, you know, you got to be hard. You know, you can't show that.
To me. So the music was one way of this release and escape.
You can be vulnerable in the music. You can be lyrical. You can be romantic.
Right.
I was going to say, was he vulnerable to the women? His women.
And a lot. I mean, I think what we show, it's so funny because this woman came up to me after showing the other night and said, you know, I'm just so happy that you put women in the film and their relationship to Miles, because I think you see over and over again, you know, what his need for women, you know, his need and what women meant to him, and what Frances meant, and what Marguerite meant, what Cecily meant, you know, Betty Davis, who changed his whole musical outlook, or what all these women, Cecily Tyson, what these women meant to him.
Right.
Well, the French girl was the one that tore my heart apart.
Oh, she's great. She's
tore my heart apart.
Juliet Greco. She's just incredible. And Juliet Greco, the interview was done a couple of years ago, and his relationship with her started in 1949 when he goes to Paris for the first time. Right. And in the film, she's so amazing because you could see she's still in love with him.
She's still in love with him.
You could just, I mean, it's like this, you know,
she had this sort of Simone Signoret sort of face, and it was a wonderful vignette in your film.
And you can just see it, you know, that she still loves him.
But I just wonder how you did this, how you lived with this. How many years did you live with this, Stanley?
You know, we started thinking about the film almost 15 years ago, and we had thought about it, and we had started to do some stuff. We had talked to the family. The family had agreed, you know, to let me do it, and then we kind of put it aside because life kind of came, you know, at us real fast, and then about 3 years ago, we hooked up with American Masters on PBS and Eagle Rock out of London, and I had kind of kept in contact with the family a little bit, you know.
Nobody ever did a documentary.
No, nobody ever really did a documentary. Really but I should also say that my wife, Marcia, who's my business partner, and we worked together, it was really her. I mean, she was always like, what about Miles? What about Miles? You know you want to do Miles.
Thank God you married her.
What about Miles?
Thank God.
Well, for a lot of reasons. But what about Miles? What about Miles? And you know, like, you know, you got to do it. And so that kind of kept it alive. And you know, we were able to kind of go ahead and do it. And we had the good graces of the family. The family's all in. The family's been traveling around the country with us.
His cousin was behind me, constantly making comments. How did Quincy Troop's book help you?
Well, Quincy Troop, that's a long story, but I'll try to shorten it. Quincy Troop, I met at a party, and Quincy Troop I started talking to him. I was like, I'm doing this film on Miles. He said, you know, I've got 40-something tapes of Miles, little cassette tapes from like the little 80s cassette recorders. I got like 80 tapes of Miles, and you know, he made them on his little cassette recorder. He wrote the autobiography of Miles with Miles, and he said the way that we did the autobiography was I would just put the tape recorder down, press record, and me and Miles would just talk. So we got the tapes from Quincy, and for like 6 to 8 months, we tried to fashion a way to use these tapes, but you know, the cassette quality was really bad because I don't think they had an external mic. They just had the mic in the recorder. The TV might be on, the radio might be on in the background.
So you were listening to this for a couple of years, nonstop.
Yeah, and they would order lunch or dinner and stuff and start eating hamburgers or something during the recording. And so finally we said, you know, this is not going to work. It's just, you know, the quality is so bad. And so we decided to go to the autobiography and some interviews that Miles had done, you know, after that, and have an actor voice Miles's words. So the film is kind of narrated by Miles, you know. So Miles is kind of the constantly commenting on his own life through his autobiography. And I think and Carl Lumley, who kind of voices Miles, is just great.
He's fantastic. What's amazing is that Stanley has to deal with two things: the autobiography book, his knowledge of jazz that has to go back more than 15 years, and a movie that came out about 5 years ago by Don Cheadle called Miles. That was very different. It was so now he has to move between jazz critics are incredibly venomous when they want to be. And either you adhere to the standard, adhere to the line, the ideological or aesthetic line, or you don't. And he has to deal with that because he has to walk these streets. He has to hang out with us. He was able, and this is what I love about Stanley's work, he was able to say, I don't care what they say. This is a love poem, a historical love poem
for Miles,
to an icon.
To him, yeah.
And you could feel it. Yes, he's clear about the foibles of a man. It's clear that he had his problems, but he is Miles Davis. And once you listen to him, once you listen to anything he does, I particularly like Miles in the Sky, you know, Miles Ahead. When you hear him, you realize that we have not moved beyond Miles.
No, we can't.
We have not moved. The only one who is able to represent Miles today is Wallace Roney, who is so incredibly gifted that he can take a pure tone like Miles could. He could just take one line and just keep it going. Just keep it going. That's the wonderful thing about Miles. So Stanley has to walk in between all of these other attitudinal perceptions about Miles. And well, I don't have to tell you, he did a wonderful job.
Yeah,
you're pleased with your work? Would you put something else in? What did you? I mean, inevitably, you have to.
I'm incredible. I'm incredibly
happy.
I'm incredibly happy with the film. I mean, I think that one of the things that you know I've been afforded in this film and a bunch of other films is the time to make it work. You know, I've been making films for 40 years now, something like that. And so, you know, one of the things that I've learned is that for a documentary, the film is really made in the edit room. So we put a lot of the budget into being in the edit room. We were in the edit room for almost a year on this film, and I'm talking about all day, every day, you know, 5 days a week, you know, 40, 50 hours a week for 50 weeks or something like that. You know, it's an incredibly long time. It's an incredible amount of money, but I think that's what makes the film that it is, that we were able to make the film that we wanted to make. So, no, I mean, there's nothing, you know, there's some stuff.
Everything essentially in there.
You
didn't leave it on.
There's nothing that I left in that when I see the film, I'm like, oh God, you know, I wish I would have done that. There's nothing. I mean, if I told you the little things that I would change, you'd be like, what are you talking about? You know, there's just like, oh, I wish that shot was on half a second longer, or you know, but just little things. And so, but part of that I think is just a matter of sanity. You know, I would go insane if I sat there constantly, oh God, I wish I could have put this in. I wish I could have done that. No, we made the film we wanted to make. You know. And we're very, very happy with the reaction to that. I mean, the reaction's just been crazy. Yeah. And you know, one thing that's hard for people to understand, or maybe understand, is like, you know, when you make a film, you have no idea what the reaction is going to be. You know, you don't know. You know, so you're making this film. You know, there's 5.
He's getting great reviews.
There's 5 people.
The
Yeah, there's 5 people who saw the film.
Right.
One of the greatest memories I have right now, and this will last me the rest of my life, is you know, one Saturday morning. When we were done with the film, I sat down with my wife, who I work with, and we sat in front of the computer because that's what we had, and then I sat there and watched the whole film with her. And the film was over, and I didn't know, you know, and I'm looking at the screen. I turned to her, and tears were rolling down her face, and she said, "You've done it." She said, "You did it."
Yes, you have.
She said, "You did it," and like. You know, that was it.
See, I'm waiting for him.
That was it.
You can do that.
I'm waiting for somebody to give him, Stanley Nelson.
Yeah.
Think about your sister now. I'm thinking of somebody giving him $20 to $30, $50 million to do a commercial film.
Okay, we talked a little about that before.
Because
non-documentary.
Non-documentary.
Well,
because the gift that he has is his dedication. This takes an incredible amount of dedication, tenacity. You got to stay there. Did you hear what he said? 50 hours.
Yeah.
5 days a week in a room
for a year.
For a year.
Yeah.
That's solitary confinement. You got to do. Now you're watching the images, but you've got to decide. And I say this because I'm very close to Melissa Hayslip, who did Mr. Soul.
Yeah.
And she had to do the same thing. Stanley has to stand there, and then ultimately he has to make the decision. Understand that. Yeah. He has to say, cut it. Well, how could you cut? Right? How could you cut? How do you do that? And yet in the film, it's seamless. The film rides like this. It goes like this. It's seamless.
Right.
It's almost like, have you ever seen Tai Chi? Have you ever seen the form Tai Chi? Right. It's not hard. It's not boom. It's like this. It's almost like it's wonderful.
Let's play around a little with. I don't know if Felipe has the 30, 40, 50 million. Or
I will.
You will. Okay. Would you take that on, or what would you do? What do you think?
Of course I would. I mean, you know,
And what would you do?
When I actually went to film school here in New York. I went to City College, CCNY Film School, and you know, I was very interested in making fiction films. When I got out of film school, I got a job with Bill Greaves, who was like the kind of dean of black filmmakers, and he was doing docs, he was doing documentaries, and so that's what I started doing with him.
And then working with Bill Moyers.
Yeah, I worked with Bill Moyers for a while, and so you know, and so I mean, I love doing docs, and I think that one of the things that doing documentary films has allowed me to do is to kind of really work steadily and become better at my craft. You know, I think one of the things that I find very hard about fiction films is they take so long to pull together. You know, you spend so much time not making a film. Well, no. I'm saying you spend so much time like trying to sell the film, trying to get Sony or Paramount or somebody to put in the money. You know, trying to get the actors,
the money is there.
You know,
you got the money. What would you do?
I don't know. I
could give him a few ideas.
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of ideas. You know, but I don't know.
I would love to see you do the revolution in Puerto Rico. I'd love to see that.
Yeah.
Something on Albizu Campos or something out of the ordinary.
Yeah.
He says he went to Hollywood and met with this young person, and they didn't even know what he was talking about. He brought up a subject that was black. They didn't even know what he was talking about.
It's just very hard. And I think it's like saying, you know, in some ways, as I was talking about it before, I was thinking like, you know, it's like saying, you know, you're a painter, but you know, you can't pick up the brush and paint, you know, except once every few months or once every 2 years or something. You know, that's what happens so much in fiction films. I mean, one of the things that slaved me when I was living in Hollywood, I went by this guy's house. Actually, a friend of mine was house sitting for the guy because he was out of town. This guy had this beautiful house. I mean, beautiful house. He had a pool. He had, next to the pool, he had a writing house. He was a writer, a script writer. He had a writing house that just he used for writing.
Off the pool.
He had never had a script made.
There you
He
go.
sold his scripts, and they weren't made. And then he sold another script.
But he made money.
He made enough money to have this setup, but none of his scripts ever gotten made into film. And that to me was kind of the epitome of the problem with Hollywood. You
It's
know?
inorganic.
I mean, I've been able to go at documentary films is to go, you know, film after film after film after film. I've been very lucky, I have to admit, but I've been able to do that, and I think that's why I'm able to make a film like Birth of the Cool, which I think is, you know, another level for me. I mean, the Black Panthers, Vanguard of the Revolution.
Oh my God!
That's a great film.
It is.
You know, that's a great film.
And again, he had to face the critics because there are people who have very strong opinions.
How are you portraying that in the history?
What side are
that
you
time?
on? Are you on the Eldridge
exactly.
side? Are you on the
so you had to play that
Huey Newton side? It
political
was
game.
deep, and he did it, and he did it wonderfully.
Yeah.
You know, we're taping this 9/11. This show right now. It's going to be shown on Sunday. What do you think Miles would be feeling and saying today and playing today about where America's at? And in the yeah, you're grimacing a lot. I mean, I know that's an unanswerable question, but
No, it's not unanswerable.
well,
I think
we
he
could
would
always
have incorporated. He
What
would
would
have
he-
been
what he-
incorporating.
What would he tell us?
What
would he try to express for us?
He would be incorporating Anthony Braxton. He'd be incorporating Jerry Gonzalez in the Fort Apache Band. He would be incorporating Bruno Mars. He'd be incorporating.
Break that down a little for our audience, a little bit more here.
Bruno Mars is the new phenomenon in R&B today. He is Puerto Rican and Hawaiian, and he is an incredible beat artist. The man can make you dance no matter what. He's the personification of Jackie Wilson, Prince, and Michael Jackson. Jerry Gonzalez and the Fort Apache Band took Latin jazz and took it to the next level. It was as if bebop came all of a sudden and took Latin music. He's now dead. He died in Madrid. Dear friend of mine. But he took it to the Cubans, who are for us the epitome of the jazz artists. In fact, one of their pianists, Gonzalo Rubalcaba, is considered one of the finest pianists in the world, jazz pianists.
Right.
They love him. So Miles would have been listening. Miles would have been listening to that. And then Anthony Braxton is the avant-gardist saxophonist in our country. He's like Ornette Coleman. Okay. And he would have incorporated all of that and would have come out with another kind of album. It would have knocked us out. Let me tell you that much.
What do you think?
I think that it would be interesting. Look, my kids, my two youngest, who are 20-year-old twins, they listen to trap music, and they listen to that's all they listen to.
What is trap music?
And trap music,
what is that?
Migos and those people, it sounds like. It sounds like music from outer space. It sounds like you know, it sounds like I died and came back 20 years later, and they've invented this. It's not even like that. It's very heavily into bass. It's very minimal. I'll play you some when we're done. Okay. But it's just a whole other thing, you know. And
how did your kids like this movie?
Did they love it. They love
okay,
it.
so
they love it. They get it, you know. And that's always a big thing for me is when my kids kind of get they can get it. I'm very happy. But you know, and look, Miles was working on a hip hop album when he passed away. His last drummer was a go-go drummer. You know, the music out of Washington D.C. was go-go music. They actually finished the album that he was doing with bebop called Doo-Bop, but that's what he was working. I mean, Miles was miles ahead. You know, he was constantly he was constantly doing new things. And I think the thing about Miles that's really important. It's a hard thing to describe. But when Miles did different kinds of music, he was all in. You know, he was all in. It wasn't like sometimes, you know, jazz musicians will be like, oh, let's do a bossa nova album. Oh, let's do a country album. You know, but Miles was not like that. When Miles did something, it was like, I'm never going back. This is what I'm going to do this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life.
He was not a dilettante.
He wasn't. He was married, as you said in the very beginning, and nothing could take him from that.
Yeah.
Issues with women or, you know, police, nothing swayed. Drugs.
Right.
He said he was all in.
He was all in.
Yeah, and that
you know, in martial arts, when you're hitting a board, you don't think that I want to hit the board. You look beyond the board. Do you know what I mean? You
Yes.
hit.
Well,
you
never
want
done that, but I'm
you know,
imagining. Yeah.
But you go beyond the board.
I got you.
Miles went beyond 2 boards, 3 boards. That was
He thought that
He
far.
saw it. He saw it, and I think that the film is the personification of that. And Stanley, if I've never said it before, I want to thank you for that film.
Absolutely.
God bless you.
Thank you.
Same here, and our audience too.
Yeah,
that
please,
you're gonna
audience,
be-
go see it.
Go
see
got
it.
to,
Go see it.
absolutely.
I mean, you
go
got to see it.
yeah.
You got to see it on the
That's-
big screen. I mean,
yeah,
it just. So
absolutely.
you know, one of the things we were talking about how I feel about it and everything. You know, one of the things that for me, I'm just so amazed to see it on the big screen, and like the pictures look so good, and the footage looks so good, and the interviews, I'm like, oh, they're in focus, yeah. You know,
The
I mean,
music,
and the
Stanley,
music
the
is great,
music
and the
is
music
fantastic.
The music is just incredible, and so I'm just, you know, that's what I see when I see the film.
So it's playing again at the Film Forum
Till the 19th.
till the 19th of September here in New York, and you are working on it going to
Yeah,
other
well,
theaters?
it's going.
It's going.
It's going all over.
It's going to go
all over the country.
All over the country.
But like right now, I don't know where it'll be Sunday, but it's playing at BAM. We're hoping that they
Brooklyn
extend
Academy of Music.
Brooklyn Academy of Music. We're hoping that they extend it. They were selling out last weekend, so that there's a good chance it's still
Great.
at BAM. But the big thing, if you go to milesdavismovie.com,
Okay.
milesdavismovie.com, then you go to screenings and it tells you where it's screening all over the country.
If I can say anything, it's this. Folks, this is a cinematic tone poem. This is something that you need to see not only for yourself, but for your children. This is a poem about America. This is a poem about the black man in America. It's a poem about the
love, relationships.
It's love, but it's also about the privation. It's about PTSD.
Yeah.
It's about what we have to suffer as black men. It is a poem that you must bring your children to. It's called The Birth of the Cool, Miles Davis. If you do nothing else in terms of bringing your children to movies rather than see Star Wars and the Avengers, bring them to see Miles Davis. One of the problems we have in this country is we are not loving jazz the way we love religion. You've got to love jazz the same way you go to church is the way you got to go to jazz clubs. That's the only way we're going to keep this original American art form intact and alive.
Thank you.
Amen. Amen. In the last 10, 15 seconds we have, couldn't agree with you more. Thank you so very, very much. It's an honor, privilege.
That's my privilege. Thank you
to
so
have
much.
you here.
Thank you.
Felipe, thank you, my brother.
As always, thank
Felipe,
you.
Thank you
always
so
great.
much.
Thank you,
man.
brother. Always, always.
Go see Miles Davis. Thank you so much. This is Jim Vrettos. Thank you so much for watching us here on The Radical Imagination. We'll see you again next week.